So this talks about why and how you should end up with zero personally identifiable information inside your analytical data stores, primarily the data warehouse and your data lake. The reality is there really just is no good excuse for keeping sensitive information in most of your analytical stores. And in a different talk, we'll talk about the actual way of making that happen. But here we're going to talk about the reasoning for it and the general approach. So PII and privacy. So personally identifiable information is very sensitive to people. It's the information, their last name, well, not their name necessarily, but when combined with other things that can actually identify their accounts or identify some secrets about them. So this would be the obvious ones are social security number and other things, which is also covered by PCI, the Credit Card Institute. But really, when we talk about PII, it's personally identifiable information, and they are attributes. Attributes that are designated as PII have a higher bar of data protection than other data. So anything designated as PII must be protected with way more vigor than people traditionally apply to a lot of their data. Breaches with PII will be treated severely, both by regulators and by customers. Although there is a certain amount of being worn down right now. But in the end, you can be sued and you can have regulatory problems if you have data breaches where PII was lost. Right? People hate when you lose their accounts and other information that can be used to steal their identity. So I want to talk a little bit about privacy and how this is related to this. This data is also protected by law or by contract. There are privacy laws being passed that talk about how PII, identifiable and personally identifying information, should be handled. And if you're in breach of that, you're going to have problems. There are also rules around disclosing where customers can ask everywhere their personally identifiable information is used. The more places you use PII, the more places you may have to disclose, depending on how your auditors or your regulators view your information. There are other rules coming out now about forget my data. And this can actually be in two parts. It can be due to a request, or it can be because of a regulatory change that says when somebody is no longer your customer or no longer part of your organization, you need to delete their data within a certain amount of time. If you have PII, personally identifying information, in many data sets, I know a company that a friend of mine worked for, they had a few thousand, 10,000 data sets or something had PII in them, right? That becomes a nightmare when you have to forget somebody or when you have to disclose where you've got their information. Now, people are working on making the rules a little thinner on that stuff, but the reality is privacy rules are going to be added. You look at GDPR in Europe and you look at the CCPA in California, and you can see that the writing's on the wall for protecting data. And so the more places you have sensitive information, the more you're going to have to protect. So what's the problem we're talking about? Or why is this a problem? Like what makes it hard to pull this out? PII fields, the information isn't required, but what is required in a lot of queries, or we're doing machine learning or other things, is you want to be able to join across data sets, and a lot of times it's the PII that you join across. So if we can't have PII in those data sets, what can we do? And I think the answer is we replace that PII data with another form of data that lets you, in a consistent way, that lets you join across data sets. And we'll talk a little bit about it in another talk. PII comes from many sources. So this is a major problem because you don't actually control all the systems that feed you information. It may be a third party feeds you PII. So the question is, when that data comes in from a third party or from one of your teams, is there some standard approach to dealing with PII? And I think that's one of the things we want to talk about is the primary fix for this is to standardize how you create standard processes that can be then have PII either scrubbing or PII removal or PII replacement. And so what we want is a standardized ingestion pipeline or a standardized ingestion approach. And because you may bring data into your analytical stores in a couple different ways, we may need a couple approaches. So we want to fix the problem. Man, I should change the order on these. We want to fix the problem before the data enters your lake or your analytical store. Once it's in the lake or analytical store, it's too late. You have no idea who got access to it. It's already joined to a bunch of other systems. This actually has to happen really early in the process. And what we want to do is we want to replace the PII values with non-PII values that are consistent across the data sets so that they can still be joined. I'm just going to, this is super high level because I really want to keep this under like 10 minutes. So one of the things we can do is we can standardize our streaming pipeline. So if you have a streaming pipeline for ingesting data into a analytical store like a warehouse, or you've got a data lake that's got streaming pipeline, what we want to do is force everybody through that pipeline where possible. So in this case, I couldn't make up my mind. We have streaming. We actually could do a shim tier on the front of your streaming system that would scrub it before it ends up in the streaming system. This is actually probably the best place, because then if anybody's in the data store for the streaming system, you don't have to worry about them seeing PII. So I'd actually recommend that. The other option is to do it on the back side. So on the back side of the streaming system, you're going to have some kind of fan out tier, maybe unless you have let people connect directly to your streaming system, and you don't have a tier on the back. In that case, we'd have to do it on the front side. If you do have proxies on the front and the back, because you're trying to isolate from the streaming system's specific nature, then you could do PI scrubbing there. The original data would still be in your streaming store, but anything that came out would actually be scrubbed. And that might be another way to do it. All right. So it turns out a lot of places, what we do is we have ETL jobs. We still have batch jobs. And so you're going to have to, and a lot of those just write directly to their data stores. And what I'm going to argue here is they can't do that anymore. They actually got to go through some kind of staging system. So there are two options. There's probably many, but the two I'm going to pick out are you can do a drop box or drop zone kind of thing where you have a DMZ or a landing zone, and then basically the ETL drops everything in the landing zone, and there are data mover jobs that basically will go pick up things from the drop zone, scrub them, and then store them in the lake or in your data warehouse. The other option is to have your ETL jobs not use a streaming system as the drop zone. And so in that case, we'd have the same picture we had on the previous page. We just added the ETL on the front of it, and then we either put PII scrubbing in the front of the stream, which is probably the right place, which is definitely the right place to do it, or we can put it on the back side of the stream. So, and then that would have the normal consumer pipeline and all that kind of stuff, and it would load up into the lake. Really what it comes down to is we don't have a choice, right? Regulation is going to force, and privacy rules and lawsuits are going to force people to continue to, companies, continue to reduce where their PII exists. And so the only way I can think, like, to reliably do this is you're going to have warehouse and lake ingestion. Instead of a million standalone jobs that all write to the data source, they're going to have to be standardized and have choke points added where that scrubbing can occur. And this won't happen overnight. Like, you probably already got the wrong data in your lake or in your warehouse, and you're going to need to start moving groups of data sets together where they can still join, or you'll have to create new data sets with the PII scrubbed and then slowly delete the other data sets as you move consumers off of it, right? So the problem with getting rid of PII, if people are doing queries and stuff, is you got to figure out a way to make that whole join thing work and then migrate. And then the queries for the consumers aren't actually impacted, right? So if we can do this right on the ingestion side, it turns out a lot of the consumers won't really care. They'll never know because they weren't consuming those PII fields anyway. And if they were, then we got some other issues there, and we need to look at how maybe to give them the access to those fields. The journey of scrubbing 1,000 PII fields, and I've seen places where they have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of PII designated fields because they have petabytes of data, and those petabytes of data, you got to go back through and figure out which ones have PII in them. So this is basically you got to start with the first step. You got to build some ingestion thing. You got to come up with a service to do this. And then maybe that service to do the scrubbing would be callable from legacy. And then really what you want to do is migrate everybody onto the standardized platform. So I really wanted to keep this short, so it's not very deep, but I hope this is still useful to you. Leave comments if you want to see something different, or if you think I should take a different approach with this. That'd be great.